Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another interview video. We're talking about interviews today specifically, and most notably from PCGames. We're back on here, link in the description. Ken Alsop managed to sit down with Yoshi P, the director and producer of Final Fantasy XIV at Gamescom 2024, and asked some serious questions about the future of Dawntrail's combat. So obviously full rights to them, link in the description, go give it some love. So let's talk about this then. Ken says, Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail might have divided opinions with its slightly lower stakes story and sideline role for its core cast, but there's one aspect everyone seems in unison on: the combat content in the MMORPG's new expansion, including its dungeons, trials, raids, savages and extremes alike, has all been incredibly well received. It combines the inventive and flashy design seen during Endwalker with more unique and challenging mechanics, and it's a ton of fun as a result. So they sat down to talk about all sorts of things combat related. So they say, while the story is often cited as the biggest reason why Final Fantasy XIV is one of the best MMORPGs of all time, which in my opinion it is, I've always loved, says Ken, the act of playing it as well. While I adore Endwalker's raid and Alliance raid fights, narratively and aesthetically they can certainly feel a bit too much like a walk in the park at times. Beautiful, meditative and pleasing, but a little too relaxed. Indeed, Yoshi P himself said prior to Dawntrail launch that he felt that the Final Fantasy XIV combat content was too repetitive in Endwalker. His plan then is to increase the variety of mechanics players see, and hopefully push us all to think a bit more and build our own strategies to respond to fights. Dawntrail has certainly delivered so far, especially with its extreme trials, the endgame expert dungeons, and the first raid tier, the Arcadion. But that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of that push for a more fulfilling gameplay experience. As the team builds towards 8.0's expansion, as such, I asked Yoshi P if the positive response to combat in Dawntrail has given him confidence in his plans to test players more. Yoshi P says, and I quote, "Of course, when the expansion first released, the level cap was raised, and that's really just the starting line. I have to say that the players' response to the new mechanics is more positive than I was expecting. There were more players who liked the mechanics than I anticipated." Yoshi P tells Ken here via translator, and so now we are creating the raids for 7.2, the second part of Arcadion. We're going to be working on incorporating more unique experiences and surprising things, so I hope players will enjoy that. Ken says there's more to come before we get there, of course. Yoshi P says, in patch 7.1 we will be having the Final Fantasy XI crossover Alliance raid, Echoes of Vana'diel, and we'll also be creating a 24-person Savage, which is shaping up to be really good. So just to let you know, 7.1 not only is the Alliance raid for FF11, but apparently the 24-player Savage is in that? I didn't know that. I completely thought that was a different patch. That's exciting. So I hope players will look forward to that. Yoshida's mention of a 24-player Savage has sparked much discussion, so I asked whether it will be tied to either the Alliance raids or the new Bozja-style, large-scale multiplayer content the team is working on, and whether Yoshida specifically wants to respond to concerns that Endwalker's Alliance raids were a little low peril. Yoshi P says, so firstly, with regards to the Alliance raid, it will be designed as usual so that players can enjoy the experience, he responds. But having said that, we have received feedback that Alliance raids are getting too simple, and so we have designed it in a way that it's not going to be a walkthrough. Currently, we would say about the normal Alliance raid in terms of difficulty that it's quite standard. In the development team, we have always had this discussion, and it's tough to decide on where we should draw the line in terms of compromise. We always need to consider what the average item level of the gear is that players have, and what it's going to be, and it's really difficult to predict. Ken says sometimes the average item level can be above what's expected. Yoshida explains, but sometimes it falls below. Yoshi P says, when we're testing content, we include members of our marketing and PR teams, and we found that we are sometimes where we are just wiping, and there are some times where we just end up running through it and it's super easy to clear. So it's really difficult to decide where we draw the line. We are really torn all the time. However, this time, when we were making the Alliance raid, we decided very clearly that we wanted, when a player goes through on their first playthrough, they will probably wipe 3 times. This was what we felt was a good line to draw. It's not that we want to make it difficult, but we also want to provide an exciting experience for the players, so I hope they will experience that. On the other hand, the 24-person Savage, this is going to be a completely different boss, so it's going to be completely different content, okay? That's certainly an exciting prospect, says Ken, and it'll be interesting to see how the team has developed mechanics for a larger group to handle at once. Past Alliance raids have incorporated some really fun ideas, even back as far as Crystal Tower, but many of these mechanics aren't as noticeable today due to the sheer power of the average player and the familiarity with the content. In closing, I asked Yoshi P about the response to the recent Savage tier for the Arcadion. It was certainly a delight, but players across the board felt that it was cleared relatively quickly, in particular due to a light DPS check, meaning that there wasn't as much need to optimize your play once you'd learned how to approach each fight's mechanics. Was this intentional to help players get into the Savage raiding, I query, or did it fall more to the DPS balance changes that landed on the same day? That's a great question. Yoshi P responds, whenever we release a new expansion, in the first tier of a raid series we always lower the difficulty, Yoshi P remarks. He does, however, address the DPS balance. The Pictomancer stood out above the other DPS jobs, but when we took into account that players are really enjoying playing it, we didn't want to nerf Pictomancer. For that reason, we took a decision to power up the other jobs. So when it came to the DPS check, we had already done the balancing, and that happened before we powered up the other jobs. The DPS check tweaks are very last minute, typically right before a patch releases, Yoshi P explains. We could have potentially adjusted the DPS checks, however that could have led to a situation where the value adjustments might have been too high and players would not have been able to clear the content. End quote. Ken says this is a situation we saw in Endwalker 6.2 with the Savage variant of its 8th raid fight, where Yoshi P himself wrote an apology post to explain that a quote, miscalculation on our part resulted in the boss's HP being roughly 1% too high in comparison to previous 4th stage Savage raids, end quote. Ken says this led to many players struggling to clear it at launch and certain weaker jobs being discriminated against in Party Finder, a situation that's rarely seen even among the highest tiers of play in Final Fantasy XIV. That's not the only potential issue, however. Yoshi P says there was also the possibility it could cause a bug and that the server could go down. So when we took that into account, we thought, let's just keep it the way that it is so that players can enjoy the raid. But of course, I do know very well that players in the community really look forward to the world first race, and they had expectations of a really tough encounter. So in that regard, I do think it's a shame that the tier wasn't as tough as they were expecting. Having said that, in 7.1 there will be the 24-player Savage content, and there will also be the latest Ultimate Encounter Futures rewritten, based on the Eden raid series from Shadowbringers. And in the 7.2 raids as well, we're creating a DPS check so that it's not going to feel as loose. We will take into account what we've done so far and do a good job of creating content moving forward. End quote. So, I didn't know that we were going to get the 24-player Savage stuff at the same time as Futures Rewritten Ultimate, at the same time as the Alliance raid for Echoes of Vana'diel. So that's going to be quite an interesting patch. That is a huge patch. And then in 6.2, of course, we've got more Savage and normal raid for the Arcadion, but they've promised here to boost the DPS checks. It's going to be interesting to see how 24-player Savage works, considering a lot of the time the 24-player mechanics in Alliance raids aren't too difficult, or there's a little bit of wiggle room. There's a lot of forgiveness for people messing certain things up, apart from a couple of examples that I can't really think of off the top of my head. But 24-player Savage could probably up that. If 24 people have their own personal mechanics to worry about, similar to some of the fights that we've had in the 8-player content, it could be quite interesting. And it could probably bridge the gap from a lot of people who come from games like World of Warcraft, who are used to much higher amounts of players in their raid group for the high-end content. It might be a really good example of if it works in 14. It's a good test bed, and the only way to find out will be firsthand. But very exciting stuff. Great little interview. Obviously, thanks to Ken Allsop and PCGames for this. Go give it some love. It's in the description of the video. But yeah, some really good stuff coming out of Gamescom so far, and I wasn't even aware that it was the same patch that we were getting the Savage 24 player as well as the Alliance trade, but that's cool. It'll probably be like a minor patch, you know, like 7.1 point something, maybe. Anyway, let me know what you think about harder difficulty content. Were you happy with the Savage tier? Do you think that the DPS checks were too low? Are you excited for that, you know, being boosted in 7.2 with that middle of the road sort of middle tier difficulty returning with DPS checks? Are you excited for the 24 player Savage? I know I am. It's going to be interesting to see what the rewards are, because that's the thing that everybody's going to be asking. Where does the item level fit in, and what do you get from a 24 player Savage? Because it could completely change the way that progression works in this game. Anyway, much love. See you all next time. Bye bye.